So let's go ahead and look at some of the basic tools in Illustrator. The tools are located in the toolbar, which by default is on the left-hand side. And you just click on an icon to select the tool you want. The rectangle tool is, not surprisingly, the one with the rectangle icon. But if you're having trouble finding the rectangle tool, it might be because it's hidden underneath some other tools. And that's one of the features of the toolbar, is that any tool that has a little triangle in the bottom right-hand corner actually has multiple tools in a sub-menu hidden underneath. So if your toolbar has a star, for instance, you just have to know that the rectangle is still there. It's hidden underneath that star tool where all the basic shapes are located. So let's go ahead and select the rectangle tool. Before we create a rectangle, let's pick the color that we want the rectangle to be. There's a few different places we can do this. One area is on the toolbar in the bottom. There's a color picker. And there's two different parts to the color picker. There's the fill part, which is the box on top, and the stroke part, which is the box on the bottom. The fill color is the color that's going to fill the body of the rectangle, and the stroke color is if you want to add an outline to the outside of the rectangle. So currently, since the stroke box is white with a red line through it, that means that no stroke color is selected, which means that if we created a rectangle right now, it wouldn't have an outline. It would only have a fill. If we double click on either one of these sections, I'll double click on the fill color, you get the color picker, which will allow you to select whatever color you want. On the right hand side, there's a slider that allows you to select the hue color. So for instance, if I wanted a red tone, I could slide the hue slider to the top, which is where red is, and I could pick whether I wanted it to be a light red, a dark red, a muted red, or a saturated red. I'll pick kind of a lightish saturated red and click OK. If I wanted to pick a stroke color, I would just double click on the stroke tone and select whatever color I want. I'll select kind of a dark gray. Another way we can pick a color for our rectangle is in the control panel, where on the far left there's a box for the fill color and a box for the stroke color. If I click the down arrow, you'll see that there are a bunch of predetermined default swatches, and these can be really useful. If you want, for instance, a shade of gray, or you want a basic color like CMYK yellow or CMYK red, you can just go ahead and click that and apply that to the fill color. You can do the same for the stroke color. But since I want my red color, I'm going to go ahead and go to Edit, Undo to undo applying that yellow color swatch. And undo is a really useful hotkey to know. So Command Z or Control Z on a Windows computer is the way to undo. So it's a good one to know because it's one of the most useful commands in all of the Adobe programs. Another thing you can do with this control panel is hold down Shift and click on the body of the color, and that'll bring up a separate window which will give you a little bit more control. You can adjust any of the color values in the CMYK color scheme to create whatever color you want. So you can see that the color I picked down here with the color picker is made up of 0% cyan, 0% black, with 88% magenta and 75% yellow. So those are the color values that make up this red swatch that I created. So I can adjust any of those individual values if I want to tune this color. The other thing I can do is double click on the fill or the stroke color over on this side to bring up that color picker, which is the same color picker that I was using down from the toolbar. So let's go ahead and draw our rectangle. And the rectangle tool works exactly how you would expect. If you click and drag, you can define a rectangle of any shape and dimension you want. And then when you release the mouse button, it's going to draw that rectangle. So you can see that it made the rectangle with the red fill color we selected, along with the black stroke color we selected. The stroke is really thin, and that stroke weight or width is defined by this measurement, which is also in the control panel. So if you click this drop-down menu, you can select something wider. For instance, 10 points is going to be a thick border, or you can use these arrow keys to adjust it. And since we have the shape selected, it's going to adjust that width as we adjust the stroke weight. If we go down to 0, the stroke will disappear, and you'll also see that the stroke color will go back to a white square with a red line through it, and that's because there's no longer a stroke color on this rectangle. Another thing that you'll notice is as you work in Illustrator, these little pink guides will pop up. And these pink guides are called smart guides, and they help you create things in a logical, precise way. So for instance, if I wanted to define a second rectangle and I wanted it to line up with my current rectangle, I can hover my mouse, and when I see this pink line extend down, it's telling me that my cursor is in alignment with the edge of that other rectangle. So now when I click and drag a new rectangle, I know that the edges on the left side are going to be in alignment. I can also do the same on the right side. So you can see once I get to the edge of the rectangle on the right, a pink line will extend down, telling me that I'm in alignment with that old rectangle. Another trick you can do is while defining your rectangle, while the mouse is held down, if you then hold down Shift as well, the rectangle tool will constrain the drawing of a rectangle to just a square. And this is a theme in a lot of Illustrator tools, where holding down Shift will constrain the drawing to some sort of precise measurement. So if I wanted to create a square that was the same width as this rectangle, I could just hold down Shift until the smart guide extended down, telling me that I'm in alignment, and then release the mouse. You want to release the mouse before you release Shift so that it keeps it a square. If you release Shift first, you'll tell Illustrator that you don't want a square anymore, and it'll go back to drawing a rectangle. So you always want to release the mouse button before you release Shift, otherwise that precise adjustment won't take place. So now that we have some objects to play around with, let's go ahead and take the selection tool, which is at the very top of the toolbar. You can also get to it by clicking V, and make some adjustments to these shapes. The selection tool is one of the most important tools because it allows you to select objects that are already on the canvas and move them around and adjust them. So when I click on this bottom square, for instance, you'll see that these anchor points come up that show that it's selected. If I click and drag on one of these anchor points, I can make adjustments to the shape of this square. I can also click on one of the side adjustment anchor points, which will constrain the adjustment to just that direction. So if I want to adjust the width of this square but not the height, I can use those side anchor points. For rectangles, there's also an additional function, which are these little corner anchors that are a little bit inside of the corner, the adjustment anchors. And if I click and hold down on those and drag, I can adjust the roundness of the square. So if I want a square with rounded corners, I can define that with these little anchors on the inside. You can also move things with the selection tool. So if I click on an object and drag, you can see this outline pops up that shows where I'm moving that object to. Smart guides will also pop up that'll show me when things are aligned. So for instance, this smart guide is showing me that the centers of these two rectangles are aligned. So if I release when that smart guide is up, I'll have alignment through the center of these rectangles. You can also select multiple objects with the selection tool by holding down Shift. When I hold down Shift and I click on the second rectangle, it'll have both of them selected, which is really useful because I can move them around together or resize them together. And when you're resizing, this is another instance where holding down Shift will constrain the resizing so that you're not skewing the dimensions and you're just scaling it up or down proportionally. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that by hitting Command Z or Control Z on a window. And then deselect these two shapes by clicking outside of the shapes. So now none of them are selected. And then I'll show you the other way you can select multiple objects, which is to click and drag to create a selection area. And then when I release, it'll automatically select all the items that were in that selection area. You can also make copies of objects really easily using the selection tool. And you do this by holding down the Option key or Alt on Windows. And when I toggle that key off and on, you can see that the cursor changes to kind of a double cursor. And this shows you that you're in a duplication mode. And so if I then click and drag, the selection tool would normally just move this object. But since I have Option selected, it'll duplicate it instead. So this is a really useful way to create copies of what you're doing. So if I now hold space to kind of move the artboard over and then do it again, this time I'm going to hold down Shift after I already started dragging with the Option key, and that'll constrain the movement to being either at a straight angle or a 45-degree angle or vertical. So that's just another way to constrain your movements. So if I wanted to make the duplication exactly horizontal, holding down the Shift key will help me do that. And then if I hit delete when there's objects selected, those objects will go away. So overall, the selection tool is a very intuitive tool, and it's something that's generally going to do what you think it's going to do, which is really great. So let's go ahead and explore some of the other tools that are hidden underneath the rectangle tool. If I click and hold down, the window extends down and I can choose these other tools, including the rounded rectangle tool, which is actually not that useful since you can create a rounded rectangle out of a regular rectangle just by using the selection tool and clicking on these inner anchor points. So it's actually not that different from the regular rectangle tool. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Underneath the rounded rectangle tool, there's the ellipse tool, which will allow you to create ovals and circles. If I hold down Shift while creating an oval, it'll constrain the circle to a perfect circle, which is really useful. I'm going to go ahead and delete that also. Underneath that, you have two related tools, the polygon and the star tool, which work a little bit differently from the others. First of all, they create the tool by dragging outward from the center, which is a little bit different. And then also you can use the up and down keys to adjust the amount of sides that you're creating in your polygon or star while you're working with the tool. So if I press down, I can go down to a 5-sided pentagon, or if I click up 3 more times, I go to an octagon with 8 sides. If I hold down Shift, it's going to try to constrain those sides to be level. So that would be like a stop sign shape. I'll go ahead and delete that. Then the star tool is really similar. It grows from the center, and then if I click up, I can change the number of points. You can also hold down Alt or Option on the star tool, which will make the inside of the shape have level points. So this can be pretty useful. Like for instance, if you're trying to make a 5-sided star and you want those inside points to be level like they are in the American flag, the Alt key can help you do that. So that's just another little trick. With all of these shape tools, instead of clicking and dragging to define the shape, you can also just click once, which brings up a dialog box. And this dialog box will allow you to draw a shape with exact specifications. So for instance, with the star, it asks for the outside radius, the inside radius, and the number of points. When you click OK, it'll draw a star exactly to that shape. You can do the same with any of the other tools, and they're all a little bit different. For instance, with the rectangle, it asks for the width and the height, and then it'll draw it exactly to that shape. So if you ever need a rectangle that's a very exact measurement, that's the way to do it. And then lastly, we have the line tool, which is kind of like the shape tool, except that it doesn't create a closed shape, it just creates a line. And these lines, since they're not closed, can't really have a fill color because there's no area to fill. So they're actually really just defined by the stroke color. So if I give this the stroke color of green, you can see that it's a green line. It works pretty much exactly how you expect. You can also increase the stroke width to make it thicker. And then underneath the line tool, there are a few other tools, including the arc, spiral, and 2 grid tools. I'll let you play around with those on your own. And you can also go in and play around with the other tools in the interface as well. There's a lot of really interesting, powerful tools in Illustrator, and sometimes just playing around is the best way to learn them. So that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.